Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And now I am joined live in the studio by the Prime Minister, Theresa May. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning, Andrew.
Can we agree, to start with, that the one thing that voters deserve in what you yourself have said is going to be a very, very important election is no sound bites?
Well, it is absolutely crucial, because this is, I think, the most important election that this country has faced in my lifetime, that when people look at this election and when they hear what the politicians are saying, they think about the national interest. That should be what drives people when they go to vote.
But no slogans. We can agree for the next 23
come on, Andrew,
minutes.
You know that we will all be talking, as we go through this election, every party will be talking about what they think is important. I'll be talking about
strong and stable.
Well, I'll be talking, and there's a reason for talking about strong and stable leadership and having a strong and stable government. It's precisely because this is the most important election the country has faced in my lifetime. It's about the future of the country. It's about the national interest.
It's just that people can listen to that kind of thing and think it's a bit robotic.
No, when I talk about leadership, when I talk about the strength of the government for the future, I do it for a reason, and the reason is this. We are facing a moment of change in this country. We're facing a moment when we have the opportunity to take this country forward, to make it an even better place to live for people, for their futures, a more secure future for people. But part of that, part of doing that, is about getting the Brexit negotiations right. And it's important when we go into those negotiations, and we've already seen some of the comments that have been coming out of Brussels, which show that at times these negotiations are going to be tough. So in order to make sure that we get the right result, the best deal for this country, the deal that's going to work for people across the whole of this country, we need to ensure that we've got a strong hand in that negotiation. And that's what I'm talking about when I say to people, I want people to go out and vote. I want everybody to go out and vote on June the 8th, because this is such an important election. Of course, I ask them to vote for me, but I want to make sure everybody goes and casts their vote. I'm
going to come on to the Brexit issue in a moment, but the other big thing about this election is that you are standing for the first time asking for your own mandate and your own name. And one of the questions people are asking, is this going to be, as it were, continuity David Cameron and George Osborne, or is the government, is the Conservative Party taking a subtly different direction under Theresa May?
Look, I served in David Cameron's cabinet. I served as Home Secretary for 6 years, and I was very proud to serve with David. And if you look at what he did in government, he took a country from the brink of bankruptcy to a point where we had growth and where we see the deficit coming down by 2/3. And it's because of the decisions that government took that we now see, for example, 1.8 million more children in good or outstanding schools. But of course, I'm my own person. There are issues that I think we need to...
So what is the different direction that we should be looking for?
Issues that I think we need to address in this country. First of all, of course, the circumstances have changed. So we do need to deliver on Brexit. That's what people have asked us to do. And that's what I'm determined to do, and get the best deal for this country. But also, I think that there are long-term issues that we need to address. Long-term issues about the impact of the ageing population, for example. Long-term issues about what sort of economy we want to be in the future.
Because meanwhile, we have in this country a huge number of working people, particularly public sector workers, who have now had 7 years of below-inflation pay increases, a really tough freeze on their pay. That can't go on, can it, in the next few years? Or is it vote Tory and get more public sector pay freezes?
No. We've had to take some tough decisions about the public sector, about public spending. We did that because of the state of the economy that we were left by the Labour Party when we came in 2010. Now we need to look to the future, and we need to address the longer-term issues that the longer-term challenges the country are facing. We need to ensure that we are getting decisions in the public sector right, but also that we have the strong economy. Because you're talking about pay in the public sector. And you can only ensure that we're putting the money that we need into the public sector if you've got a strong economy to pay for it. Now, you will only get that with strong government. You will only get that with a government that understands the importance of growth in the economy and ensuring that government is doing what it needs to encourage that growth.
Let's pluck out a specific example. Lots and lots of young people do a job that I wouldn't do and perhaps you wouldn't do. They decide to become nurses and give something back. Now, according to the Royal College of Nursing, they have had a 14% pay cut since 2010. And we now get stories again from the RCN of lots of ordinary nurses by the end of the week having to use food banks because they can't afford to pay for food. That is not the kind of country that you want to run, is it?
I want a country that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. If we look at what happens, well, if we look at what is happening in relation to pay within the National Health Service, in fact, when you look at basic pay together with progression pay, actually for around half of NHS staff, they have annual increase of around, on average, 3% rather than just the 1% basic pay. But I come back to the key question, which is, we have, and if you look at the National Health Service and funding in the National Health Service, we're putting £10 billion extra into it.
I'm sorry, Prime Minister, but we have nurses going to food banks at the moment. That must be wrong.
We have, and there are many complex reasons why people go to food banks. And I want to develop an economy where, yes, we have a strong economy so that we can pay for the public services that people need, but also we have an economy where we're creating secure jobs and well-paid jobs and higher-paid jobs for people. Well, but you're only going to do that if you've got
they haven't got enough money to eat at the moment.
But if you're only going to be able to do this if you have a government that understands the importance of that strength in the economy. If you look at the proposals that the Labour Party are coming forward with, they're nonsensical proposals which simply don't add up and would actually lead to less money being available for the National Health Service, less money being available for public sector pay, and higher taxes on people.
Under the Conservatives, under your government, the record number of food parcels last year has been handed out, according to the Dressel Trust. 1.2 million food parcels in this country. You said that on Number 10 doorstep that you were going to be out there for the ordinary working people. Those are people who are really, really suffering. And I've asked you, under your government, if people vote Conservative again, is that going to carry on? And the answer seems to be yes.
I haven't said that, Andrew. What I have said is that if I'm elected as Prime Minister, if a Conservative government is elected, what we will be doing is working to create a strong economy in this country, an economy which ensures that we're creating secure and higher paid jobs for people. I want people to have security for their future. But to do that, we need to get the Brexit negotiations right. To do that, we need to ensure we're developing our economy. That's why I've introduced a modern industrial strategy.
Well, let's carry on talking.
It's about firms growing and prospering, but it's also about making sure that prosperity and growth is around the whole of the country and not just confined to certain parts of the country.
Let's talk about the whole of the country and again about working families. There are lots of benefit cuts in the pipeline. If they were introduced now, then 3 million households in this country would be on average £2,500 worse off. Again, if they vote Conservative, that is what is going to happen.
We have made changes to welfare as a Conservative government, and there's a reason for doing that, which is we want to ensure that, of course, there is a welfare system that gives people support when they need that support, but I also want to see a welfare system that is helping to encourage and see people getting into the workplace. I think work is the best route out of poverty. And as we look at how we do that,
families I'm discussing.
As we do that, we need to ensure also that we are being fair to working families, to the taxpayers who are actually paying for those benefits. That's why we have made a number of changes to the benefit system to ensure that there are more incentives in the benefit system for people to get into work. But yes, if we're talking about working families, what is important is ensuring that we have the economy that is developing those higher paid jobs, and also that we provide people with the skills to take those jobs. And that's where what we're doing, for example, for young people on technical skills is so important.
Looking at what's happening in the real economy, this sounds very much like continuity austerity is Theresa May's message. Do you ever pause and wonder whether you've got it wrong?
What I want to do is to ensure that as we look at the circumstances we're in at the moment, because things have changed and life will be different in the future, we won't be in the European Union any longer. We need to get those Brexit negotiations right. I want a strong hand in those negotiations if I'm Prime Minister.
Let me give you another example then. Well, if I may.
Can I just finish this point? It's about those Brexit negotiations, but it's also about enthusiastically embracing the opportunities that Brexit will give us as a country. That's an opportunity to develop our economy, to develop those higher paid jobs, and to develop the skills that people need to take those jobs.
Would that include an opportunity to properly fund schools? Because in England, primary schools are facing a £3 billion cut by 2020. And lots of parents watching this programme are well aware that parents are having to come in and fill in for classes where there aren't enough teachers to be provided for. There are raffle sales for books. Education in England in particular is badly underfunded. And I ask you again, is there any prospect of change if people vote for Theresa May as Prime Minister?
Let's look at actually what is happening in education. We said that we will protect the core schools budget, and we have done that. In fact, the level of funding
is falling.
In fact, the level of funding going into schools is at record levels. It's something like £41 billion this year.
But there's a lot more pupils
what we're also looking at, yes, and as the number of pupils increases, the number of the money going into schools increases.
But what we're also funding is falling, and is going to carry on falling until 2020.
We have protected that core schools budget, but what we are also looking at is introducing a greater degree of fairness in the way in which schools are funded. Everybody across the political spectrum has accepted that the current way that we allocate funding to schools is unfair. We want to bring in a much fairer system of funding for schools. We've made some proposals, we've consulted on them, and obviously we'll be responding with our final proposals in due course.
You don't accept nigh figures, Prime Minister. Here's the National Audit Office. Mainstream schools have to make £3 billion in efficiency savings, that's cuts, by 2019-20 against a background of growing pupil numbers and a real-term reduction in funding per pupil. And I say to you again, surely you have to rethink what's going on in schools.
What we need to look at in schools is to make sure that we have a fair funding system that is ensuring that the way that money is allocated to schools is fair and is fair across the country.
One of the reasons that the Conservatives have had to oversee so many cuts in so many areas is that under the last government you made an absolutely clear and to many people ridiculous promise to never raise income tax, VAT or national insurance, the so-called triple tax lock. Are you going to repeat that?
We have absolutely no plans to increase the level of tax, but I'm also very clear that I don't want to make specific proposals on taxes unless I'm absolutely sure that I can deliver on those. But would be my intention as a Conservative government and as a Conservative Prime Minister to reduce the taxes on working families. And if you've got strong and stable leadership, that's absolutely what you can do.
You would accept that that tax lock was going too far. Your Chancellor thinks it tied his hands a little bit too tightly.
Look, when people come to look at this decision at the next election on June the 8th, they will have a choice between a Conservative party that has always been a low-tax party, that actually over the last few years has taken 4 million people out of paying income tax altogether, and a Labour Party that is about raising taxes, that is about higher taxes for the future. So a Conservative party that believes in lower taxes and whose intention is to reduce the taxes on working families, or a Labour Party that wants to increase tax.
You mentioned social care a moment ago, and you have said that this is a huge issue for the country. It can't carry on ducking. It's big, big news for the NHS. Have you come to proposals to help us on social care?
Well, as I've said before, I think if we look at this issue on social care, we need to think of it as there are short-term measures to take, and we've taken that. In the budget, we put £2 billion extra into social care. In the medium term, we need to make sure that good practice is spread across the whole of the country. If you look at things like delayed discharges from hospital, which is where hospitals interact with local authorities on social care.
Are we going to see a step change on this?
I said there are three stages to this. There's the short term, £2 billion extra going in. There's the medium term, which is about spreading best practice around the country. And longer term, we need to have a sustainable solution for social care. And yes, we have been working on that sustainable solution. And these issues, an issue like this about the impact of our ageing population, is exactly the sort of long-term...
Tell us a little bit more about the sustainable solution then.
Is exactly the long-term issue that I want to address for the future. And if you want to know what's in our manifesto, Andrew, you'll have to wait until the manifesto is published.
All right. Is the triple lock on pensions still safe?
Under a Conservative government, the state pension will still go up every year of the next Parliament. Exactly how we calculate that increase will be for the manifesto, and as I've just said, you'll have to wait for the manifesto to see what's in it. But what we see already is that because of the actions taken under Conservatives in government on the basic state pension, pensioners are £1,250 a year better off, and under a Conservative government, the state pension will continue to rise each year.
What about pensioners whose pension funds collapse at the same time as their bosses are heading off the Mediterranean into yachts with vast amounts of money in their back pockets? That is going to change, is it?
Yes, it is, because I think this is one of the injustices. I think we have seen examples, a limited number, we have seen examples where workers have been really worried about the future of their pensions because of the actions that's been taken. So what we would do is we would bring in new rules and new powers for the pensions regulator, so that if, in certain circumstances where companies were being taken over, there would be new powers for the regulator to make sure that the issue around people's future pensions was being addressed, so they had reassurance of the future of their pensions.
If this was in practice in the future, would a future Sir Philip Green be prosecuted and possibly jailed for what he did?
Well, we would also be introducing greater powers to take action against individuals if what they were doing was about effectively trying to destroy people's pensions for the future.
Let's turn to l'éléphant dans la chambre, Brexit. You said in your Lancaster House speech that no deal was better than a bad deal. Do you stand by that?
Yes, I do. I think it's important, but I also think it's important that we go in there with the strength of hand in negotiations to get the good deal for the British people. That's what I want to do. And that's why I say that every vote for me and my team on June the 8th will strengthen my hand in those negotiations.
Because you've now had a private conversation with Mr Juncker and the rest of the team, and it doesn't seem to have gone terribly well, because Jean-Claude Juncker said apparently to Angela Merkel after meeting you, "It went very badly. She is in a different galaxy. Based on that meeting, no deal is much more likely than finding agreement." Was it that bad a meeting?
No, look, I'm not in a different galaxy, but I think what this shows, and what some of the other comments we've seen coming from European leaders shows, is that there are going to be times when these negotiations are going to be tough. And that's why you need strong and stable leadership in order to conduct those negotiations and get the best deal for Britain. I'm confident we can get a deal. You see, the Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, has been very clear that she thinks we will get a trade deal.
But we've also seen the 27 standing absolutely shoulder to shoulder on the question of wanting a deal on money before they will even talk to us about trade and other issues. And they made that very, very clear this weekend. And then the Luxembourg Prime Minister is talking about between 40 and 60 billion pounds worth of deal to be sorted out. Can I put it to you that if you win this election, if you get a big majority, the first thing that you will do is go over there and sign the cheque?
No, what they're very clear about is, yes, they do want to start some discussions about money. I'm very clear that at the end of the negotiations, we need to be clear not just about the Brexit arrangement, the exit, how we withdraw, but also what our future relationship is going to be. These negotiations are going to be tough.
Are you prepared to agree on the money before you agree on everything else?
I want to ensure that we agree on a trade deal and our withdrawal arrangements so that we know what both of those are when we leave the European Union.
But they are saying you must agree the money first.
No, they have, if you look at what is being said in the guidelines, they say that they want to start the discussions on a number of issues. There are things that we absolutely agree on should be early in those discussions. The position of EU citizens living here in the UK and the position of UK citizens living in those 27 European countries. Absolutely, we agree, should be early in the discussions. They also agree, if you look at the guidelines, that we should be discussing the development of a special partnership for the future.
Sure.
So there is much on which we agree on.
But it is absolutely critical to this issue and to the election campaign. You are saying that you will not agree to pay a large bill to the EU until the entire negotiations are finished, yes or no?
And the EU itself has also said that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
All right, well, let's move on to some of the other issues. You mentioned EU citizens. Now, if I was somebody watching this programme, and perhaps I was married to a French or German citizen, I'd be very, very worried about their status and my children's status in the future. Jeremy Corbyn has said that if I become Prime Minister on day one, I guarantee their status. Why can't you do the same?
I believe that as the United Kingdom Prime Minister, it's important that I have a care for UK citizens who are currently living in the 27 countries, remaining countries of the European Union. That's why I say I think this is about reciprocity. I think it is about us. I want to be able to guarantee EU citizens living here their rights and their status, but I think it's important that we ensure that UK citizens living in Europe have their rights and status guaranteed as well. There is goodwill there. If you look at my... Sorry, Andrew, I think this is an important point. If you look at my Article 50 letter, which triggered... the letter that triggered Article 50, I was very clear that I believe the rights of EU citizens here and UK citizens in Europe should be an early discussion, should be an early point of agreement for us. And if you look at the guidelines, that's exactly what the EU has, the 27 have agreed as well. There's goodwill there. I believe we can give that reassurance to people at an early stage.
Do you think the richest people in this country, people perhaps in houses worth more than £5 million, are paying their fair share of taxes? Should they be asked to pay more, given that we've got a tough time still ahead of us?
If you look at what has happened in terms of tax, the top 1% of people paying tax are actually paying a higher burden, a higher share of tax than under a Conservative government, than they did in any year under a Labour government.
But going ahead?
I think that it is right that we ensure that the tax system is balanced. As I've been clear, it would be my intention to reduce taxes on working families. I think you can see...
Including the richest.
I think you can see... from the fact, well, let's look and see what we've done as in relation to tax.
Let's not go back into history. We haven't got time for history,
well,
I'm afraid.
I think our record is important in this tax issue.
And
We've taken 4 million people
Okay.
out of paying income tax, and 30 million people have seen a tax cut, which to a basic rate payer is worth about £1,000 a year.
I've just been having a conversation with Tim Farron about his attitude to gay sex. You are also a Christian. Do you think that gay sex is a sin?
No.
And do you think that, looking at what happened to Tim Farron, I know he's a rival leader in all of that, that there is an aggressively judgmental mood being imposed on Christians in this country that other groups don't have to face?
Yeah. I think that obviously if anybody who is a leader of a political party, who is putting themselves up for election, who is asking the public to trust them, is bound to get a whole range of questions from a whole range of different groups.
Some people think the reason that you called this election is that 30 Conservative candidates and or agents are under investigation by the Crown Prosecution Service, could be facing charges quite soon. Can I ask if that issue was discussed at all when you were discussing the election?
That is not the reason why this election has been called. And let's be clear, in relation to the Electoral Commission issue, local spending was properly declared. The Conservative Party did make an administrative error on its national spending, as did other parties. We have paid our fine. I would expect other parties to do so.
If people are facing CPS action, should they be able to stand?
Well, the CPS is an independent body which will make decisions about whether or not it takes actions on individuals.
Okay.
What I'm very clear about in this election is that this election is about the national interest. It is about the future of our country. And that's why I say to people, I want to see everybody voting.
And you have raised again and again the question of Jeremy Corbyn. Can I put it to you that when it came to one of the most important votes that we've had in recent times on the Iraq war, whatever you think of Jeremy Corbyn, he was on the right side looking at history and you were on the wrong side. You went into the voting lobbies behind Tony Blair and voted for the Iraq war, which had so many disastrous consequences. And he did the unpopular thing and stood out against it. On that, at least, he was right and you were wrong.
If we look at this choice at this election, the choice people will be making is who do they want to see as Prime Minister? Who do they want to see leading those Brexit negotiations? Who do they want to see defending this country? What Jeremy Corbyn has shown is that he's not prepared to stand up for the defence of this country. His economic policies simply don't add up.
If you knew then what you knew now, would you still vote for the Iraq? Would you still have voted for the Iraq war?
Well, that's a hypothetical, Andrew. You can only vote at any point in time on what you know.
Do you regret voting for it?
On what I voted in the way that I thought was right. When that vote came into Parliament.
But he was right on that and you were wrong, isn't that the truth?
No. I voted in the way that I believed was right when the vote came to Parliament. If we look ahead, there will be tough decisions to be taken. I think it's important that we have in number 10 a Prime Minister willing to defend this country, to stand up for the defence of this country. Jeremy Corbyn has shown he's not willing to do that with economic policies that will take this country forward.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed. We've covered a lot.
I'm delighted to be joined by the Prime Minister, Theresa May. Prime Minister, could I take you back to July the 13th of last year? You're standing on the pavement outside of 10 Downing Street, and you say that your vision is building a society, a Britain that works for everyone. And there's a huge amount in that address about lifting up poorer people. Every serious think tank, the IFS, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Resolution Foundation, says that over the next few years, the poor will get poorer relative to the rich. That's not what you want, is it?
Well, you're absolutely right. When I stood on Downing Street back on the 13th of July last year, I set out my vision for a country that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. There were a number of elements of that. Some of that was of dealing with injustices that I feel in society today, and we've put in place a number of things already that will address some of those issues. I made a speech earlier this year, for example, about how we can put more into supporting people with mental health problems. I've set up a audit to ensure that we look at how the public services actually deal with people from different, from black and minority ethnic communities, a discrimination survey, looking at audit of public services. So setting in place the steps that actually help us deal with those injustices. But looking at those people who are, as I've said, perhaps struggling, they've in work, but they perhaps find it worrying about whether they've got job security. They're paying a mortgage, but they're in their home, but they find it a bit worrying about paying the mortgage. Sorry,
please.
But the important thing is to strengthen our economy so that we can ensure that we can create more secure jobs and higher paid jobs for people into the future. Now, doing that's about Brexit and getting it right. It's also about taking this country beyond Brexit.
But the current forecasts, based on the idea that actually you were going to be in power for the next few years, have incredibly slow earnings growth predicted by most economists. And at the same time, benefit changes introduced by your government are seen by, again, every analyst as disproportionately hurting the poorer. Is that something you will address if you are re-elected?
Well, there have been welfare changes that have come under the Conservative government. That's absolutely right. A number of reasons why we've done that. I mean, first of all, we're introducing a simpler welfare system in universal credit, but also a welfare system that helps to encourage people into the workplace. I think work is the best route out of poverty. And yes, we need a system that does provide support for those who need it, but I think we do need to incentivise people to get into the workplace. We also have to think, when we're looking at welfare, for the taxpayers who are paying for those welfare benefits. Some of the very people we've just been speaking about, who perhaps do find it difficult to make ends meet, are actually those who are contributing to the benefits of others through their taxes.
But if the gap between rich and poor were to widen on your watch, would you regard that as a failure?
Well, I want to see, absolutely, as I said last year, I want to see the country that works for everyone. That's about developing a stronger economy. You only do that with strong and stable government.
Sounds as though you think it would be a failure. If you say you wanted to work for everyone, then you want to lift up the poorest.
I want to lift up. What I want in this country is I want to see a country where people are able to get on in life and see a better future for themselves and their children and their grandchildren. That's about a whole range of issues that we need to address. It's about ensuring we see growth and prosperity across the whole of the country. It's about ensuring we provide opportunity for all, so that we have a good school place for every child. And in doing that, that we ensure that we're a meritocracy, that how you get on in our country is about your talents and your hard work. That's what I want to see.
But if we look at the tax changes that actually were introduced or promised since you became Prime Minister, which is the promise to raise the threshold for 40% tax and raise the tax-free threshold, again, all the work shows that that disproportionately helps people on above average incomes.
Well, what we've done by raising the threshold of the personal allowance is, of course, taken 4 million people out of paying income tax altogether. So 4 million people who were on the very lowest of earnings not paying income tax any longer. And the changes we've made mean that a basic rate taxpayer is about £1,000 a year better off as a result of those changes.
But even so, most of the money is going to people who I think would be above your threshold of just about managing, and that must worry you, surely.
Well, but if you look at the tax, the percentage of tax that's being paid by the very richest, the top 1% of people are actually paying a higher percentage of tax, higher percentage of the overall.
You regard that as fair, don't you?
The point is they're paying a higher share of the burden, a higher percentage of the overall income tax than they did in any year under the Labour government. It is right that you get the right system of taxation. The Conservative Party has always been a party that believes in lower taxation, and that's what we want to do for the future. We absolutely want to reduce taxes on working families.
So David Cameron promised £1 million essentially tax-free for couples on inheritance tax. Is that something that you think should be a priority?
Well, there are many people in this country who, because of what has happened to the property market, find themselves, people who are in fairly, what some people would consider to be ordinary circumstances, but find themselves potentially caught by this issue. That's been an important issue for a lot of people. But if you look
But is it a
across,
priority at a time of scarce resources?
If you look across what we want to do on taxes, we've no plans to increase the level of tax. As I say, as a Conservative party, we're a party that believes in lower taxation, and I think that's the key choice that people will face at the election, is a contrast between a Conservative party that does believe, that does want to reduce taxes on working families, that has, as I say, taken millions of people out of paying tax income tax altogether, and a Labour Party who want to increase taxes and whose policies would lead to them increasing taxes.
I mean, on that, we had John McDonnell sitting just where you were a couple of minutes ago, and he was very explicit that for those that they see as above middling incomes, they want to put taxes up. Given what you say your record as a party is on taxes, do you need to repeat David Cameron's triple lock, no rise in VAT, no rise in income tax, no rise in national insurance? Do you need to repeat that?
Well, I'm clear that we have no plans to raise the level of tax.
What does the level mean? I'm not sure what that means.
In relation to specific taxes, we won't be increasing VAT, but what I do want to ensure is that we are able to have
so
the strong...
You definitely won't raise VAT. That's a 100% commitment.
But what I want to do is to ensure that when we do look more widely at the tax system, that what we say on the tax system, we're absolutely clear we can deliver on it for people. And also, as I say, I want to see us able to reduce taxes on working families. And that can only be done with strong and stable leadership. It can only be done with a strong and stable government, building that stronger economy.
But it does sound to me that what really matters to you, apart from VAT, is the sort of overall burden of taxation rather than micromanaging at this stage individual tax rates.
Well, I think it's important that we look at that overall burden of taxation. As I say, my desire, my instinct, and what I absolutely want to do is to be able to reduce taxes on working families. But we are only able to do any of this if we build that strong economy. And that's why it's important to have that strong and stable government that can deliver on that strong economy. I think Jeremy Corbyn's economic policies are nonsensical. I think they just don't add up.
Now, something remarkable happened over the last few years, which is actually almost the first time, certainly in recorded history, those who've retired have now larger incomes after housing costs than working people on average. Part of that has been driven by your triple lock protection for state pensions for older people. Actually, shouldn't you redress the balance more towards working people? Isn't it time for that triple lock to end?
Well, under a Conservative government, the state pension will still increase every year. Now, precisely how we calculate that increase will be a matter for the manifesto. But if you look, as you say, pensioners' incomes have improved. The changes that have been made to basic state pension mean that pensioners are £1,250 a year better off. And as I say, under a Conservative government, pensions would continue to increase state pensions would continue to increase every year. But the issue that you raised, the wider issue you've raised there, Robert, is a really important one about this intergenerational fairness. And that is a factor of a whole range of things. There are people today who really worry about whether their children and grandchildren are going to have a better future than they did, than they've had. But it's about a range of issues. It's about ensuring that we have that strong economy, creating those secure and higher paid jobs. It's about ensuring we're building more affordable homes. It's about making sure there's opportunity for all through a good school place for every child, through ensuring we're giving young people the opportunity to get the skills to take on those high paid jobs.
So just to be clear about this, I don't think I'd be wrong, would I, to assume that you'll probably drop that 2.5% minimum increase for pensions?
You would be wrong to make any assumptions. As I said, precisely how we...
But it does sound as though you're going to a double lock, not a triple lock.
Precisely how we calculate that increase will be a matter for the manifesto. If you want to know what's in our manifesto, wait and read our manifesto.
I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister's work visa has been extended and she's still with me. But first, here's Anushka.
Thanks, Robert. Lots of reaction. The hacks have spotted a story because the Prime Minister has followed John McDonnell in saying there will be no rises in VAT, although that clearly leaves wriggle room in other areas. Others are commenting on the issue of inequality. We have an Evening Standard journalist here saying Theresa May dodges whether it will be a failure if the gap between the rich and poor grows on her watch or if she'll help the poorest. There's also some reaction on the issue of Brexit. Francis O'Grady here, the General Secretary of the TUC, saying, can the PM guarantee that UK workers' rights won't fall behind the rest of Europe? Well, talking about Brexit, there is something this week that has had Brexiteers applauding, but might be quite sad for about 48% of you. Look at this European Commission map. They've greyed us out already. It's a bit like deleting your ex from Facebook. Now, the Prime Minister says she wants to remain Bezies, but if you'll allow me to flog the analogy here, she is ready to press the unfriend button if necessary. She has said again today that no deal is better than a bad deal. But what does no deal actually look like? Well, this is what the experts warn of, if you believe them. They say that British citizens living on the continent could be at risk of losing rights, for example, to free healthcare. They also warn of tariffs. WTO rules would put 36% on dairy products, a worry for British farmers. And that is a car park on the M20, because if there is no agreement on customs, then there could be onerous checks in places like Dover. Now, some civil servants are already looking at the possibility of no deal, and given the tough talk from this lot yesterday, perhaps it could be more likely. Robert.
Prime Minister, just to pick up on that, do you genuinely in your heart of hearts believe that no deal would be better than a bad deal?
Yes, I do. I wouldn't have said it if I didn't believe that. But what I also believe is that with the right strong hand in negotiations, we can get a good deal for the UK from these negotiations. That's what I want to do. But I believe you need to have strong and stable leadership in order to be able to achieve that.
But if no deal is a realistic, non-disastrous outcome, shouldn't you be planning now to expand warehouse capacity at ports, recruiting people to do customs checks? Because we'll need all of that if we were to crash out.
I'm very clear that I want to go in there with a strong hand to negotiate a good deal for the United Kingdom. And actually,
but wouldn't your hand be strengthened if you prepared Britain now for no deal?
I think my hand will be strengthened if at this election people voting in the national interest vote for the leadership, the strong and stable leadership and the strong and stable government that this country needs. But if we look at what is happening in relation to the negotiations, which of course haven't formally started with the European Union yet, if you look at the guidelines they've set out for their position and my Article 50 letter, there's a lot that actually we agree on, wanting to have that good and special partnership into the future. Wanting to be able to give reassurance to EU citizens living here and UK citizens living in those other 27 countries. There's a lot that we can agree on between us, but of course the negotiations will be tough at times. We've seen that from some of the comments that have come out recently.
Now, they want us to hand over quite a lot of money to them, the money they think we owe under our previous budget promises. They said yesterday in their guidelines that they would not start to talk about trade with us, a future trade deal, unless we agree the elements of what we will pay them. What do you think about that?
Well, what I think is that, first of all, it's important that at the point at which we leave, we know what the future relationship is going to be, and that's about the future trade relationship, but also cooperation on other areas like security, for example.
Does everything have to be nailed down at that point?
I think it's important that when we leave, what I don't want to see is a cliff edge where suddenly nobody knows, you know, 1 minute after midnight on the appointed day what their situation is. That's why we've said we'll bring EU law into UK law so that there's a smooth process, and I think at that point people should know what the future trade
broad
relationship
parameters of the trade relationship.
Well, they should know. I think we should be looking to negotiate a comprehensive free trade agreement within this period of time that we've got.
You think that's realistic, do you?
Well, I do, because if you think about it, we're in a different position from other countries. It's not like we're a third country who's starting negotiations with them. We've actually been part of the European Union. We still are at the moment, a member of the European Union. We're operating on the same basis. So we're starting from an entirely different point. So I think that actually us negotiating a comprehensive free trade agreement will be easier, should be easier, and that we can do that within the time frame we've got.
Are you prepared to wait till at least the basis of what we pay them is agreed?
Well, we will start the formal negotiations in June. There are a number of things that I think that we need to agree at a very early stage. The issue of EU citizens living here...
So you agree with them that that's
citizen.
got to be agreed at an early stage?
I want that to be... Yes, that was in my Article 50 letter. It's in their guidelines. I think there's goodwill on both sides.
There.
So we get
Is there a
reassurance on that.
dispute, though, about how fast we can progress this issue on budget payments?
Well, if you look at some of the things that have been said, it's been very clear from a number of leaders that they actually want to get on to the overall package, if you like, the trade issues, also fairly quickly through this process.
But they were also very clear in the guidelines that they will negotiate as one. We can't look to individual leaders who are sympathetic. We've got to look at where the weight of opinion is, and the weight of opinion appears to be that they will not talk trade with us until they know what we're going to pay them, if not to the penny, at least in broad terms.
They have, what they've said is that they want to start those discussions before they start discussing the issues around trade. You're right, they're very clear they're going to negotiate as 27. But I think exactly this sort of issue is why it's important that we have the right leadership in this country to ensure that we've got a strong hand in those negotiations and that we're able to take our arguments and our message through those negotiations and get the right deal at the end of those negotiations.
But in your terms, you know, since you want to be Prime Minister, you already had the right leadership. And they're saying the size of your majority doesn't matter at all.
Well, I think it's important that we have a strong hand. I believe a mandate. I genuinely believe that this is the most important election the country has faced in my lifetime. And I think it's important that everybody goes out and votes on June the 8th. Obviously, I'm around the country asking people to vote for me and my team on June the 8th, because I think we have that, would give that strong leadership, that strong and stable government that's necessary for these negotiations. But the reason why I thought it was important to have this election was having done the first job, if you like, in Brexit, which is sending that Article 50 letter, triggering the formal process. It was clear that other parties wanted to frustrate the negotiations, disrupt the negotiations and frustrate that process. I believe it's important to have that mandate, to take a strong hand into the negotiations, because this is about our future. It's about getting the best deal for the United Kingdom, but it's also about a government of 5 years of certainty and a government that can take this country not just through Brexit, but beyond.
Some people feel you haven't told them enough about your vision of Brexit, given that you are making this election a mandate for you to negotiate our exit.
Well, I've set out in my Lancaster House, I made a speech in January in Lancaster House, setting out our objectives in relation to Brexit, and I noticed Francis O'Grady there had tweeted a question about workers' rights. I was clear in that speech that I gave that one of our objectives is the protection of workers' rights.
So they
indeed,
will
I
not
want to
be.
enhance
So you give a
workers' rights.
commitment; they will not be eroded.
We want to protect workers' rights and indeed look at enhancing workers' rights. It's why, for example, I've asked Matthew Taylor to do this study on the employment market at the moment to say, have we got the right protections in place and the right regulations in place for what is a changing type of employment market?
Now, we did ask our viewers what they wanted to ask you, and I absolutely promise you we haven't fixed this, because by far the largest number of questions were about why you won't participate in a TV debate. Is there any chance you'll change your mind on this? I mean, what this chap called Fox says is you would have a much bigger audience, particularly with young people, if you did this.
There isn't going to be any change, because the sort of campaign I want to run, and the sort of campaign I'll be involved in, is one that is about getting out and about, getting across the whole country, meeting people from all sorts of communities, getting into communities that have felt up till now that politicians have ignored them, have not been taking their concerns into account. I want to get out there and about. That's what this is about.
Now, unfortunately, we're almost out of time. I've got two quite quick questions. One is, there's a report in the Sunday Times that you are looking at giving tax breaks to encourage people to save for social care, for their costs when they become too frail to look after themselves. Is that something you're thinking about?
We are looking at how we can ensure that social care, we have a sustainable system of social care. A lot of pressure on social care. I've said it's to be dealt with in short-term measures, which is the £2 billion extra we put into social care in the budget. The medium term, we need best practice across the whole country.
Encouraging people themselves
and
to save with perhaps a tax break, that's something we're thinking about, isn't it?
Longer term, we need a sustainable system of social care. This is one of the issues that I think, one of the long-term issues for this country that we need to address. And again, these are the sorts of issues that we'll be looking at in our manifesto.
Now, I also noticed in your Mail on Sunday interview, you chose your 3 favourite dishes. They all sounded absolutely wonderful to me. Was nothing for the vegetarians, though. These were all these are quite meaty.
Yes, actually, they did all have. But then I do cook vegetarian dishes as well, I can assure you. But
that's a great relief.
Those are my favourites.
That's great. Anyway, very nice to have you with us, Prime Minister, and hope to see you again within the course of what's going to be a very exciting campaign. So my thanks to the Prime Minister. We'll be getting reaction from our gurus in just a couple of minutes. Alistair Campbell and Camilla Cavendish are still with me, and there's a lot to chew over. Camilla, you used to work on policy with David Cameron in 10 Downing Street. Listening to the Prime Minister, what did you think that you learned about the shape of the manifesto she will be unveiling quite soon?
Well, I think the manifesto will probably be quite broad brush. But she did say, I think for the first time, that she won't increase VAT, matching John McDonnell's pledge in a sense. But equally, I was glad that she didn't try and match Labour's pledge to protect the triple lock, because...
It was quite interesting that she absolutely went out of her way not to say she wouldn't raise national insurance and income tax. It was only about VAT.
And I think she's right. I mean, John McDonnell didn't act as if Brexit isn't happening. I mean, we need more flexibility in the public finances. We're still, as a country, spending more than we earn, but we're actually going into Brexit. We need more flexibility. So I think she was right not to make, and I hope she won't make any more specific pledges. The triple lock, you can move to a double lock, and you're still protecting pensioners because you're still indexed. So we're now talking about pensions, and again, it did sound as though that 2.5% promise that David Cameron gave, that the basic pension would always increase at a minimum of 2.5% a year. Yes. That looks as though it's going, doesn't it? I think it probably is going, and that would mean you would have a double lock. You'd still index to whichever is higher of wages and prices. Pensioners, we have done a lot on pensioner poverty through the triple lock. It's not something anybody would want to get rid of, but I fear at the moment it is, as you said, Robert, it's unaffordable and it's not entirely fair, and we're going to need,
well, it is an extraordinary state of affairs.
A bit more money.
It is an extraordinary state of affairs where retired people, when you take housing costs into account, are now richer than working people are on average. Yes. And even a double lock, which guarantees that pensions would go up by the higher of earnings and inflation, would keep them ahead of the rest of the population.
Yes, it would. And I think there are some very, very difficult choices ahead. I mean, the public services are under pressure. The last government actually took 4 million people out of tax altogether. Made a big difference. You know, basically every basic rate taxpayer probably benefited by about £1,000 under the last government. The last government also created an extraordinary and unprecedented number of jobs. And I thought the other thing she said that was very important is that jobs are the best route out of poverty. And I think that is the answer to John McDonnell. I don't think he fully understands that, and I think we need to sustain that after Brexit.
Alistair, do you think domestic policy issues will cut through in this campaign? You know, there is a fair amount of evidence that school funding per pupil is being squeezed, actually, on one analysis, by more than at any time since the 1970s. Health service, lots of evidence that there's not enough money. Is any of this going to cut through, or is it all going to be about Brexit?
It's not all about Brexit, but I think that one of the things that I think is happening in this election, I mean, it's one of the... She says it's the most important election. I don't think you can really say that, because as you pointed out to us, she already has a mandate on Brexit in terms of the referendum. and she got the vote through Parliament, not least with a lot of Labour people voting with her. But I think that what's happening in this election is it's almost as if everybody is operating on the basis that we know what the outcome is going to be.
Do we know what the outcome is going to be?
Well, we don't, because people haven't voted, but you look at the opinion polls, you sort of feel the mood. But I feel I'm living in a parallel universe, because out and about, and of course everybody says they love being out and about and talking to people, out and about, every single event that I do, every single speaking engagement I do, I ask people, are they optimistic or pessimistic about Brexit? There's massive pessimism about Brexit.
Can I just ask,
and these things are not going to cut through.
You've been very loyal to Labour today. Yeah. John Prescott has attacked your great friend Tony Blair and saying he's being desperately disloyal by implying that people should vote for other parties. Do you want Tony Blair to shut up and just put forward a Vote Labour message?
Look, I can't want Tony Blair to shut up, because this may surprise you. I've interviewed Tony Blair for GQ magazine. And it's
that is a huge surprise.
Sorry. And, no, it is a surprise, because but no, I'll tell you, look, tactical voting is going to happen.
Right.
Because
should he be encouraging it?
No, well, it's up to Tony. But let me just say this. Let me say this. I think people are getting very, very worried that the majority...
I'm going to have to cut you off.
Okay,
I'm so sorry.
So, when Theresa May was interviewed just over an hour ago on the Andrew Marr show, the Prime Minister was asked to confirm that she would repeat David Cameron's 2015 election pledge not to raise VAT, national insurance and income tax after the general election. Here's her response.
We have absolutely no plans to increase the level of tax, but I'm also very clear that I don't want to make specific proposals on taxes unless I'm absolutely sure that I can deliver on those. But it would be my intention as a Conservative government and as a Conservative Prime Minister to reduce the taxes on working families.
The Tories like to have a clear tax message in elections. Are they getting into a bit of a mess over this?
Well, I don't think that message was very clear at all. I mean, what does it actually mean, saying we've no plans to increase the level of tax? What we are clearer on this morning is that there won't be a rise in VAT. I think a lot of commentators will get a bit overexcited about that, but I don't think there was any great expectation that there would be a rise in VAT.
Because they'd already done it last time.
Right, and tempting as it is, because even 1 percentage point on VAT raises 4.5 billion for the Exchequer, so it is tempting, but I don't think there's been any real speculation that would happen. We can see that she clearly wants to reiterate the appealing language about hard-working families, but I don't think we're that much the wiser.
Even if she doesn't put up rates, the fact is that according to the official projections, the overall tax burden, tax as a percentage of GDP, is rising, will rise in the years ahead.
Yeah, that's why it was a slightly odd phrase. I know why she's doing it. It's to be evasive. But to say they had no plans to raise the overall or general level of taxation, they do have. We also know that they have specific plans, because it was in the last budget. They had a tax rise, which they then had to revise because of the 2015 manifesto, the national insurance rises. So very wisely, in my view, they're keeping options open. The 2015 tax and spend debate was a fantasy world, totally unrelated to the demands that would follow. And they will have now a bit of flexibility. And I remember you saying last time, I think I was on before they called this election, that one of the arguments you had heard was Philip Hammond saying to her, look, we've got to break away from these 2015 manifesto commitments. We can only do it by an early election. And that is one of the better arguments for having one.
The Tories, though, like to talk in elections about tax cuts. Whether they do in the end is another matter. But they're not being allowed to talk about tax cuts. They're now on the defensive about whether or not they will raise taxes. That is not a healthy position for their campaign to be in.
No, but if you look at where the numbers are, quite frankly, if you're not going to break some eggs in this general election when you've got a 20-point lead over Labour, you're almost guaranteed of some majority, if not all, then when on earth are you going to take these sort of big, tough decisions? And I think actually reading between the lines of what Theresa May has said and all over different broadcast outlets this morning, income tax will go down for lower-income families in terms of the threshold rise.
That was already factored in.
Well, it was already factored in, but she's now had to commit to it again. VAT will be flat. National insurance contributions, they're going to go up.
You think they're going up, Isabel?
I think that is very possibly, because
that's just income tax by another name.
She had plenty of opportunity to rule that out, and she didn't, so we can read into that.
And of course, that's where Philip Hammond got this terrible mess with his budget. And according to them, and it's a very good, tax argument, not a very good electoral argument, that, you're eroding your base so heavily now with people moving into self-employment. Unless you start raising national insurance contributions for everybody for the self-employed, then suddenly the Treasury's got a huge hole.
And we still don't know if they're going to, the other triple lock, which was on pensions, we don't know if they're going to keep to that either, do we?
No, and if they're sensible, they will find a form of words which will give them flexibility in that area as well, and I think they will.
I would say there's no question mark over that now. That's gone.
You think it's gone?
Yeah, I do. I do.
As Mrs May would say, you'll have to wait for the manifesto. In fact, that's what all the party leaders tell me.
I've been getting away with it all my